Ladies and gentlemen, this is Harry Wexler. I'm standing in front of the offices of the Selective Service Board. 2 days ago, this channel received a manifesto. It reads in part, "A number of deeply concerned persons will come together for an act of liberating destruction, moving at last beyond unheeded words. By our action, we shout no to the war, with its endless, senseless butchery of our brothers, both Indo-Chinese and American." 27 minutes ago, a telephone call informed us where this act of liberating destruction is to take place. Here and now. A few minutes ago, 3 men arrived and made forcible entry into the Selective Service offices. They are inside at this moment. For what purpose, we don't know, except for this manifesto, which they signed the Resistance Trio. They identified themselves as Dr. Lawrence Ryan, a Catholic priest, doctorate in sacred theology, PhD in psychology. He used to teach at the university. For the past 2 years, his ministry's been in the ghetto. Bob Fleming, a social worker for the county. We don't have any more information on him at the moment. And Melvin Weisberg, formerly a PhD candidate in math at Yale. You may remember that Weisberg was recently in the news as a very vocal, conscientious objector. Oh, Father, may I speak to you for a moment, please?
Certainly.
Father, is this a Catholic movement, Father?
No. Bob Fleming is a Protestant. Mel Weisberg is Jewish. Not practicing, but he's a deeply religious man.
Thank you, Father. You're preparing to burn draft records. Why?
That's right. It's a symbolic act. The destruction of property destroys the sacredness of life and conscience.
Well, there's nothing symbolic about the penalties for destroying government property.
Right you are, baby. Matter of fact, we just telephoned the cops to come and arrest us. Yeah, we can get up to 23 years on federal charges and about 35 for the states.
Well, then why?
Because we feel that risking our personal freedom by drawing attention to our moral objections transforms sabotage into a religious and constructive act.
If enough of those people out there willing to go to jail to show how they feel about this war, we might be able to do something about changing the conscience of this country.
Yeah, and maybe even change the bloody direction it's been going in. Here we go. Behold. 1 draft card. Father?
We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
In a few moments, the police will come and arrest these 3 men. It seems a terrible waste, a terrible shame that people so obviously sincere feel they must sacrifice their careers, their lives, in order that their views be heard and hopefully heeded.
That we shall overcome someday.
Insight, stories of spiritual conflict in the 20th century.
Government has a right to demand certain things of its citizens, and they have a duty to respond. But no government is infallible. It can make mistakes. It can pursue immoral courses of action. What does the individual citizen do who is convinced that his government is doing just that? Does he remain silent? Or does he follow his conscience and speak out?
Oh, hello, boys. Hello.
Freedman.
Good news. Good news for you. Judge O'Brien says he'll permit TV coverage of your trial.
Good.
In exchange for your waiving a jury trial and agreeing to a small courtroom with only witnesses present.
Oh, great work.
Out of sight. Yeah, cats like us are about as sympathetic to establishment jury as Hitler to a bar mitzvah, right?
Listen, what kind of a man is Judge O'Brien?
Oh, he's a good man. Good man, I think. I've represented the ACLU in his court quite a few times. Dedicated jurist, devoted husband and father, has 2 sons who fought in Vietnam, and he's a devout Roman Catholic.
Man, that should really dingle his bells if he has to convict this Roman color along with us revolutionaries, huh?
Well, anyway, he was glad to make the TV deal. He says he knows the type who'd show up at the trial. They try to turn it into a 3-ring circus.
Yeah, well, now let's just hope he'll give us a chance for what we want.
Not a prayer. The district attorney will object that nothing's relevant except did you or didn't you seize and burn those draft files.
Listen, David, we've been talking about that. we'd like to try to find some way to bend those traditional rules of evidence, procedure, and decorum.
Now, things for which you, as a lawyer, could be cited for contempt.
Or disbarred. He could be disbarred.
He could.
Well, any ideas?
Yeah. We've decided to fire you.
In case you think it unusual to be televising a trial, the defendants have waived their right to trial by jury.
Is the state
court
ready?
has granted their request that they act as their own counsel.
Defense ready?
Ready, Your Honor.
You may proceed for the state, Mr. Holt.
Your Honor, the defendants are accused of arson, burglary, and conspiracy. The people will prove, with the evidence at hand, the means by which those crimes were executed. With the testimony of a reputable eyewitness, a professional newsman, and finally, with this television tape, we will show the accused in the actual perpetration of their crimes. The state will prove, Your Honor, without a shadow of a doubt, that the accused are guilty of the malicious and felonious charges as set forth in the indictment.
Your Honor, to make a long story short, the defense is willing to stipulate to having committed the material acts listed in the indictment and set out by the prosecutor.
Do I understand, Mr. Fleming, that the defense wishes to change its plea to one of guilty at this time?
Man, that's about as likely as putting a screen door on a submarine.
What's that?
Your Honor.
What Mr. Weisberg means, Your Honor, is that we would be willing to so stipulate in exchange for entering a plea of demurral to the complaint without objection from the prosecution.
On what grounds, Father?
Well, Your Honor, we invoke Statute 939.48 of the legal code of this state, which says that actions ordinarily punishable under the criminal code may be considered privileged, non-criminal, if the action is taken with the reasonable belief that it may prevent bodily harm to another party.
Mr. Holt?
In exchange for this stipulation, Your Honor, the state has no objection to the plea of demurrer.
Very well. I will hear arguments on the plea of demurrer. Mr. Weisberg, I know that we are being televised, but it is a court of law, if you don't mind.
Oh.
Thank you. Mr. Fleming?
Your Honor, Mr. Weisberg has prepared this line and will pursue the main argument for the defense.
Yes. We say that we are innocent of any crime in connection with the burning or burglary of draft records on May 17th. Because those records were used to kill people in an illegal and an immoral war that is now being waged in
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. Mr. Weisberg, we are here to discuss the merits of this case, not the rights and wrongs of the war.
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, Your Honor.
Now, what you're trying to do is introduce immaterial and irrelevant evidence.
No, sir, Your Honor, excuse me. Your Honor, we're trying to prove that our actions were non-criminal because we reasonably believed that we were saving people from bodily harm.
All right, you may proceed, Mr. Weisberg, and may I suggest with a bit more decorum?
Read you loud and clear, Your Honor. Now, as I was saying, before I was so rudely interrupted, we committed those acts at the biddings of a moral law higher than any law in any nation.
Mr. Weisberg, Your Honor, is merely paying lip service to the chastity of his intentions while, in fact, violating the body of the law.
Well, that's far out. We've got a poet for a prosecutor.
Weisberg.
Your Honor, our object was to affirm life in a culture already oriented toward death and a malignant war.
More noble-sounding words, Your Honor. Your Honor, I really must object to the continued introduction into this trial of incompetent, immaterial, and irrelevant references to the war.
I'm sorry that you feel the war is irrelevant.
I do not feel the war is irrelevant.
Well, then you won't mind if we point out, you're not going to object now, if we point out the unconstitutionality of the war the president is
certainly
unilaterally
do.
waging and escalating throughout
I
Southeast
certainly
Asia.
do object, particularly since you're wrong. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution passed
the Gulf
in
of Tonkin
1964 by Congress was the original enabling legislation by which U.S. troops were sent into Southeast Asia.
The Gulf of
It
Tonkin...
fully authorized the president to take such future military action as he saw fit.
And the
to come to the aid of the
Senate's
Southeast
consideration-
Asia Collective Defense Pact, who
Senator
asked for help.
Fulbright,
Now,
Senator-
that includes Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam.
Senator-
Now, I trust we can get back to the facts in this case, Your Honor, the relevant facts pertaining to destruction of property.
Excuse me, now, in other words, you value property rights over human rights, is that it?
Your Honor, please, could we get back to the facts?
Smile, Mr. Holt. Remember, you are on candid camera.
Mr. Weisberg.
Your Honor, I'd like to make it pellucidly clear to the television audience that the state finds the war irrelevant only in terms of the crimes for which the defendants are being accused, and namely arson, burglary, and conspiracy.
The court knows this, Mr. Holt. No one likes to see young men die. But that is not the issue before this court.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state wishes to file formal objection to the defense's plea of non-criminal action, Your Honor, on the grounds that defense has failed to prove that the burning of draft records can in any way prevent bodily harm to anyone.
You're ignoring the congressional list of American war dead, over 45,000 corpses, and 250,000 wounded.
That isn't even counting the millions of Indo-Chinese maimed and killed.
In light of those figures, wouldn't you say it's reasonable to believe that being drafted into the war could be a threat to life and limb?
You have a chance of being run over when you cross the street at rush hour.
Oh, come on now. Downtown, I don't have to worry about people shooting at me with rifles, shotguns.
That depends on what part of town you live in, doesn't it?
This court cannot seriously accept defense's plea that the selective service system constitutes an imminent threat to anyone's life in the sense intended by the statute. Therefore, the people's objection is sustained.
Thank you.
Court rules that Section 939.48 of the Penal Code is not applicable in this case. Now, does the defense have any witnesses to call to the charge?
Your Honor, we're here to give witness ourselves. The defense calls Lawrence Ryan to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter pending before this court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
So help me God, I do.
Larry, why do you believe that it was not a criminal act to burn those draft records?
Objection. Witness may only testify to matters of fact.
Well, I understood that an expert witness could state an opinion and then draw a conclusion.
Well, true, but you haven't qualified Father Ryan as an expert in any particular field.
Well, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I guess I just took for granted that a priest was qualified in the field of morality.
Point is well taken, Mr. Fleming. The court will hold no objection to hearing Father Ryan's testimony.
Nevertheless, Your Honor, I would like to have my objection entered in the formal record, please.
So noted.
Yes, well, Larry, you want to tell us now why you think it was not a criminal act to burn those draft records?
Because the war is immoral, I felt obligated by conscience to try to stop it.
I see. Well, do you think all wars are immoral?
I think all war is obscene and irrational. And I think nuclear war in particular is immoral because man sets his will against God's design and risks the destruction of life on this planet.
But now, you said nuclear war in particular, that you think some war is justified?
Well, I can see how certain limited wars may be necessary when a nation, after exhausting all peaceful means, has to defend itself against aggression.
Excuse me, Mr. Fleming. I wonder if I could ask Father Ryan why he feels the present war is not a just one? Do you deny that Red China and her satellites are the aggressors in Southeast Asia?
No, I agree the communists are the aggressors, but I'm not aware of the United States having a preordained mission to police Asia or the rest of the world, for that matter. Are you, Mr. Holt?
We have a solemn obligation, a sworn promise to honor the CETO, Collective Defense Pact, to come to the aid of our allies in Asia if they are attacked from the outside, as they have been.
Notwithstanding, it is immoral to search and destroy, to launch new invasions and escalations, to continue to kill and bomb while peace talks are going on.
Well, the communists don't care anything about the peace talks. They continue their old invasions and atrocities.
Larry, do you want to tell us, do you have any other reasons why you think this war is not a just one?
Well, in a just war, the means used to prosecute it are proportionate to the ends desired. In other words, the good achieved must outweigh the evil suffered.
This isn't true of our defense of Southeast Asia?
By no means. No, our defense has meant too much death. Death to those we defend, death to those we're defending them against. Too many of our own brothers, officers and enlisted men, have become brutalized by the shattering experience of guerrilla warfare that allows no time to distinguish between friend and foe.
Only a madman relishes war, Father. I mean, it's always been an ugly business.
An inhuman business, Mr. Holt. We say that we're trying to protect their right to a choice, that we insist on their human dignity, but what do? We call them gooks and slopes. We shell and bomb and napalm and defoliate their land. We shunt them back and forth like cattle. We destroy their homes, and we shrug off the appalling loss of life as the fortunes of war.
You remember Hue? The Viet Cong slaughtered 5,000 non-combatants in North Vietnam alone. Ho Chi Minh killed 50,000 of his own people and jailed another 100,000 for not agreeing with his way of doing things.
Granted, but if we use the same means, wrong for wrong, evil for evil, don't we become what we're fighting?
Father, you focus totally on the bad side of our presence in Southeast Asia, and you blind yourself to all the good we've done.
What good can come from evil?
Bridges, ports, roads, tens of thousands of jobs. We've boosted food production by creating miracle rice. We've brought hygiene to pest-ridden swamps. We built hospitals, schools, clinics, orphanages. We fed, housed, and clothed the young and the old who have been abandoned.
No matter what we did, it wasn't worth what we failed to do. There, at home, throughout the world.
Is that what outraged your sense of morality, Father?
My moral outrage was caused by the diverting of billions of dollars from peace to war. Think of the flesh and blood those billions are tearing apart. Think of the homes and the food and the land those billions are demolishing. You ask about just wars, Mr. Holt? How is our war going against urban decay, against slum housing, against pollution, against disease and hunger, against social injustice here and in the undeveloped nations?
How can we accomplish all that if we can't even fulfill our commitments to defend Southeast Asia?
Money. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Administration has estimated that the world could rid itself of hunger entirely by spending $110 billion over the next 15 years. Do you realize that we've spent more than that in Vietnam alone? In 1969, $80 billion just for military purposes.
While children starved all over the world, the military-industrial complex grew pretty fat.
Your Honor, defense's contention is that the vast sums of money expended for the war are astronomically disproportionate, that the enormous evil outweighs any possible good, and therefore the war is immoral. Now, as a result, the defendants were compelled by conscience to try to stop it, taking a step to do so by burning the files of men who were about to be drafted to wage that immoral war. On this, the defense rests.
Do you wish to cross-examine any further, Mr. Holt?
Certainly do, Your Honor. Father Ryan, you said before that you were obligated by conscience to break the law.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It was a compulsion?
No. A free and very human decision, Mr. Holt.
But you feel that you must follow this conscience of yours?
It's the surest contact point I have, or that anyone has, with God.
Mm-hmm. Anyone? Does that include the president? Now, what of his conscience? Do you think it would allow him to pursue an immoral war?
I'm sure the president is doing what he believes is right, but I can't answer for his conscience, only my own.
You realize, of course, that if everyone followed your example, refused to follow legitimate authority, that the whole world, the country, would be in a state of utter chaos and anarchy.
I think people have too often obeyed legitimate authority, no matter how illegitimate its demands.
What of the other presidents, four in all, who have committed us to Vietnam in the belief that the future of Asia, the United States, and indeed the world, depends upon our stopping aggression there? What of the American people, the majority of whom, in the latest poll taken, agree with the president's handling of the war? And what of our elected representatives in Congress who have voted funds to continue waging the war? And of the officers and men who do so? Don't you think they are all following their conscience?
If they are, I believe their consciences are wrong.
Isn't that presumptuous of you, Father? To assume that they are all wrong and you are right?
Mr. Holt, I've prayed hard and long that it was prudence, not pride, that guided my decision.
Father, I have here an article written by Reverend Thomas Fisher, S.J., a professor of theology at Loyola University. He says, the notion that I have the right to do whatever my conscience tells me to do, simply because my conscience tells me to do it, canonizes the supremacy and tyranny of conscience, but ignores its obligations. Would you agree with your brother priest?
Yes, I would. In order to be able to act The conscience must be open to reality and fully informed.
But, Father, you can't be fully informed. You couldn't possibly know all the facts and considerations that go into the decisions made by our leaders. I mean, you are just not competent to judge.
If I'm wrong, Mr. Holt, it's an error I honestly can't see or overcome. And when I get right down to it, it's not my country right or wrong. It's my conscience right or wrong.
Ah, so you put yourself above country and law. And even if the whole world was against you, you would still act the same way.
My conscience may be a poor thing, but it's my own. And after I've listened to the voice of God within me, and done everything humanly possible to assure a discerning conscience what it dictates, Mr. Holt, I must do.
No further questions.
You may step down, Father.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Holt, do you wish to make a closing statement?
Yes, I do, Your Honor. Your Honor, I must act to preserve the common good of the people. I must seek the welfare of my country as I see it. And it seems to me that the first obligation of any government that is a government, not a mob, is the preservation of law and order, so that its citizens may go unobstructed and unterrorized about the pursuit of happiness and the promotion of general welfare. Yes, these defendants are good people, Your Honor, but I am firmly convinced that they are wrong, misinformed, and that their acts have produced a backlash that has polarized the sentiments of the people against the cause of peace. What they have done is detrimental, not only to their country, but to their cause, and ultimately to the cause of peace and freedom throughout the whole world. So, Your Honor, I must ask for their conviction on all charges and counts.
For the defense?
Your Honor, we agree with Mr. Holt in abhorring wanton violence. But it isn't burning a few files that's polarizing this country. It's cutting the lines of communication. It's quashing dissent. It's giving distorted priority to war over peace, to death over life, to alien alliances over our national needs. Now, these evils far outweigh any possible good we could accomplish in Southeast Asia. Your Honor, the war has alienated the younger generation. The war has caused them to lose all respect for our democratic institutions. It's pulled apart, it's fragmentized our entire society. Now, unless this polarization stops, I'm telling you, it's going to radicalize, it's going to revolutionize people who are so frustrated at being ignored or silenced.
Your Honor, if you decide that the only issue in this courtroom is whether we took and burned those draft records without regard to our motives, then you will render our act meaningless. And you will make non-violence on the part of others less likely and more difficult than ever. Our only real crime was to embarrass the government at a stage when it was not yet ready to admit that the war is a dreadful mistake.
And finally, Your Honor, we wish to reaffirm our hope that violence will be universally discredited as a means of remedying all human ills. Now, if I may quote Pope John the 23rd in Pacem in Terris, let the spirit of love overcome the barriers that divide. Cherish the bonds of mutual charity. And help us to understand each other and forgive those who have done wrong.
The court also acknowledges the intelligence, honesty, and dedication of the defendants. They have given both credence and dignity to their beliefs. We know that The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing. These men did not sit by. They acted, carrying out the dictates of their conscience, for which they now find themselves in trouble with the law. For the requirements of government and the dictates of individual conscience are not always compatible. Not easy for me to apply the law to 3 such men, but I must. There's no choice. Under Section 113 of the Penal Code of this state, it is a felony to destroy public records, no matter what the motive or reason for the act might have been. That is the incontrovertible fact of the law. It does not recognize political, moral, religious convictions or some higher law as a justification for the commission of a crime, no matter how fine the motive might be. Court has no alternative but to find the defendants guilty as charged. Do you have anything further to say before I pass sentence?
Yes, Your Honor. I ask permission to say the Lord's Prayer for all those who have died in the war, for the reconciliation of men everywhere, and for peace, so that there may be life and hope.
Granted, Father.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Insight is a production of the Paulist Fathers, a group of Catholic priests who serve their God by serving those outside their church.